p.m. and came back, hung. We're told to go back and now have a verdict all of a sudden. What's going on here?
The whole thing was breakneck speed for me. I mean, even in a routine type of murder case, you would expect, give us 10 days or something. I mean, you would expect them to take considerable more time than this. Now, that being said, I don't believe the judge was rushing them along. I mean, they put on their evidence. It's just, it seems like they got through their witnesses and it was on to the next. And we didn't have a lot of, which might speak towards the judge. There wasn't a lot of wasted time in between where we're not hearing from witnesses. So they really got through this quickly. I was shocked that we were just talking about opening statements and now we're already talking about a verdict. But even more shocking, I think, is exactly what you pointed out, of them coming back and towards the end of the day, right? I mean, he was talking about ordering them pizza for dinner, and they're indicating that they're hung, and they don't even take the evening to sleep on it, which, can be a little troubling to think how convinced of their positions were these jurors. If they're coming back, if they went through the trouble of saying we're hung and we're at a deadlock and write a note to the judge, but it didn't take more than just a few, what was it, an hour or so after that before they say they have a verdict, which makes me think that they didn't really sit around and try to come to a verdict themselves before that very light nudging by the judge.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you on there. And look at Jimmy McNutty, who's been a trial watcher since OJ. And trust me, because I follow him on Twitter, he follows every trial. He says, I bet they did negotiate. I bet one juror was not guilty, and they were 5-1 on all counts and couldn't even get her to budge. Gigi McKelvey, your thoughts coming in here, G-Money. Appreciate you hopping on. I heard you were doing your own live, but thank you for being here. I know you were covering the case. What do you make of this? Josh Ritter calling it splitting the baby, guilty on the lesser charge, but she still faces up to 30 years in prison. I think the consensus from last Josh is she won't get that severe penalty, but she's going to be in there for a fair amount of time.
Yeah, I was like Josh. I was just super surprised we had a verdict so quickly after saying we're at an impasse. And it makes me think there was a Lone Ranger who wasn't convinced. And you go back and say, look, we're all on the same page. Who knows what went on back there? But, it's a difficult case, I think, because both sides had something to work with. I mean, you had this behavior by Doug in South Carolina, even though it was years in the past, that was really extreme. To fire a gun into the ceiling during an argument, punching holes in walls, that is something the state had working against them. And I think maybe that's the one thing that kept this jury from reaching that second-degree murder verdict. On the same token, the state had to work with these allegations that were never charged, whether or not it's a faulty court system like they allege. This one was a wild card to me, Joel. I did not know what to expect. And to be honest, I wasn't going to be surprised with guilty, not guilty, or a hung jury, because I think both sides have valid points. And I never doubt victims or people who say that they are victims of domestic violence. So for me, I just sit back and listen to the evidence. It was a very, very hard call, at least on my end, trying to figure out what I would vote if I were on that jury.
Yeah, listen, you've got an amazing panel that somehow we put together in 0.07 seconds. And that's why my light is still on. I'm going to keep it off as a symbol of our, of something, of our speediness in getting to this verdict here on STS. But let me play. We've got some video that, and this is the headline, guilty of a lesser charge of manslaughter for Ashley Benefield. So not guilty on the most serious charge, Phantom 6000 back. Wow, 2-in-1 Day must be the Super Bowl halftime show. We're getting to that Super Bowl halftime show one of these days. Here's the video, Dr. G. I know you have to run. And then this is a great time. If you have questions for Josh or Gigi, let's take questions after this for a little while, or however long Dr. G wants to hang out. No pressure, but let's watch this together. We'll get Dr. G's take. I think this is the reaction to the verdict. Let's watch.
Ford versus Ashley Benefield, 2020 CF 3014. I've been informed there's a verdict. Prior to bringing the jury out, I did want to make this announcement. The jury has reached a verdict, and I'm about to bring them out so the verdict can be reviewed and published. The jury has reached a verdict, and I'm about to bring them out so the verdict can be reviewed and published. The jury has reached a verdict, and I'm about to bring them out so the verdict can be reviewed and published. The jury has reached a verdict, and I'm about to bring them out so the verdict can be reviewed and published. The jury has reached a verdict, and I'm about to bring them out so the verdict can be reviewed and published. The jury has reached a verdict, and I'm about to bring them out so the verdict can be reviewed and published. The jury has reached a verdict, and I'm about to bring them out so the verdict can be reviewed and published. The jury has reached a verdict, and I'm about to bring them out so the verdict can be reviewed and published. The jury has reached a verdict, and I'm about to bring them out so the verdict can be reviewed and published. The jury has reached a verdict, and I'm about to bring them out so the verdict can be reviewed and published. The jury has reached a verdict, and I'm about to bring them out so the verdict can be re I know many of you here in the audience have been here throughout the trial, and I want to thank you for conducting yourselves appropriately throughout the trial. I realize that the reading of the verdict can be very stressful, and it is likely that some of you will agree with the jury's verdict and some of you will not. As sometimes happens, it may be that no one is pleased with the jury's verdict. Whatever your personal feelings are about this jury's verdict, I ask you to remember that these jurors were randomly selected from our community. They were thoroughly questioned by the court and lawyers for both sides, and they were selected from the larger group to hear this case because of their demonstrated ability to be fair and impartial. I've paid close attention to this jury, and they have been attentive, observant, and focused throughout the trial. No matter how much you agree or disagree with the verdict, there are to be no outbursts of emotion. Our judicial system, in fact, our entire society, has relied on jurors to help resolve disputes for over 200 years. Their verdict needs to be respected, even if you don't understand it or don't agree with it. You ready to bring in the jury?
I'll just say Judge Matt White really handled this case professionally. He kept things moving along for sure. He's also a doppelganger of Jim Gaffigan, the stand-up comedian. But here comes the jurors. We're going to watch this just play out. Dr. G, real quick, how's she looking to you right now? People are saying...
Seeing a lot of blinking, which is usually when people start getting really stressed. So, I'm definitely seeing the stress on that front.
Yeah, that's people are saying her blink rate's at like 1,000. By the way, what is a normal blink rate, Dr. G?
I have no idea. I just know I know what it isn't when you see it, but I couldn't tell you what it is.
How about her posture? Just the way she looks hunched over. She just looks, I don't know, defeated to me.
She does. Yeah, I agree.
I'm trying so hard not to blink right now.
Yeah, it's hard not to.
The jury understands you have a verdict.
Okay, here we go. The moment of truth.
Yes, we do.
Ma'am, has the jury reached a verdict?
Yes, we have.
Is the verdict unanimous?
Yes, it is.
Would you please hand the verdict form to the deputy? I need to check it, make sure it's in proper form. All right, the verdict appears to be in proper form. Madam Clerk, would you please publish the verdict?
In the Circuit Court of the 12th Judicial Circuit in 4 Manatee County, Florida, the state of Florida versus Ashley Benefield, case number 2020 CF 3014. Verdict. We, the jury, finds as follows as to the defendant in this case. The defendant is guilty of manslaughter, a lesser included offense. Did Ashley Benefield actually carry a firearm? Yes. Did Ashley Benefield discharge a firearm? Yes. Did Ashley Benefield, as a result of discharging a firearm, cause death to Douglas Benefield? Yes. So say we all this 30th day of July, 2024 at Bradenton, Manatee County, Florida. Cheryl Forkerson.
Would either side like the jury polled? State?
I'm just going to mute it there. Dr. G, just walk us through what you're saying here, and COE, maybe you'll loop it back without volume. But what are you seeing here? The blinking is a little lower, I think, but she looks dejected.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of people seem to think that she's emotionless, but I think she gets so intense emotionally internally that she can't look people in the eye and can't look at what's going on. So she tends to look away, which she did throughout the trial at times as well. So I think she's probably someone who feels quite anxious and quite stressed, actually. But she's just very good at keeping a plain face. But at times she's pressing her lips together or blink rates high. So we're definitely seeing some real stress right now for sure. This was a pretty typical look for her throughout the trial from what I saw, outside of during the more intense parts.
Yeah, I mean, right now, right turn with a question. I guess a lot of people are wondering, where are the hysterical tears now? Would you expect her, just seeing her reaction, during testimony, or is that unfair that maybe she
No, I don't think so, really, because when she would really break down, she was talking about, and obviously I know people are probably rolling their eyes when I say this, but at times when I thought were real trauma. So when she's talking about shooting, when she's talking about situations that were very upsetting to her, like when the dog got knocked out and stuff, she would break down then. But otherwise, she didn't try to bring a lot of attention to herself. She wasn't somebody who like rolled her eyes when somebody said something they didn't like, or would shake her head really vigorously to show her disapproval, because a lot of people do those kinds of things, and she didn't do any of that. So the only time she really emoted was when she talked about what I think were legitimate reactions to trauma.
Wow, it's just chilling to watch. Josh Ritter, she's been remanded into custody. She was out on bond, but the judge revoked that, remanded her into custody, and says that she'll be there, until sentencing, where she'll probably be remanded into a state prison for some time here in Florida. Realistically, I mean, they're saying 15 to 30 years. What kind of time do you think she's looking at?
Well, the judge is going to take into consideration criminal record or lack thereof. The judge sat through this and is going to consider surrounding circumstances, that led up to this and everything as well, including, the actions or conduct of the victim. But you're talking about, they have now found her guilty of a violent felony that includes a gun enhancement. So I don't know how much that ties the judge's hands in that jurisdiction. I know that here in California that, that carries mandatory minimums, especially when you're talking about a weapons charge like a gun. So she, if it's 15 to, what did you say, 15 to 30 years?
Yeah. And by the way, STS Nation, if you know about a mandatory minimum, please let us know that what Josh is talking about with the firearm, there might be a mandatory minimum. But go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, so it might, if that is true, that will tie his hands to some extent. But 15 years, I don't think is outrageous for this type of a conviction. Now, I know people are going to feel strongly about what she actually deserves, but as far as what the judge can sentence her to, a manslaughter charge with a weapon, a gun being used, 15 years is kind of in the ballpark of what you see.
Minimum is 10 and a third. 10 and a third.
10 and a third. Okay.
Up to 30.
Up to 30. Well, I have a feeling it's going to be fairly significant. From Canine Catherine out in Maui. And again, Dr. G has to run, but Dr. G, I got one last question for you.
No, I got some time. We're good.
Oh, you do? Okay,
Yeah.
Good. Gigi, since you were there for the whole thing, did you ever come to a conclusion on how you would have voted? Gigi, I didn't realize, were you at the trial?
I wasn't. I've been here the whole time at home, but I followed it. And in domestic violence cases, Jill, I know this may be the easy way out, but my best friend, two of my best friends were in a domestic violence safe haven, so I don't give my opinion on domestic violence cases. I just don't feel it's my place to judge anybody's allegations of domestic abuse. And so I kind of, even with that, Joel, I don't know. I mean, I think that there's so much on both sides, but just out of respect for domestic violence victims out there, I'm not going to say what I think. And that may be a wussy way out, but I'm just trying to respect people who are victims.
Yeah, I hear you there. Dr. G, my question for you is, how does anyone, let alone a woman who, said that she was, abused by her husband and all these different allegations, but now she's found guilty of the lesser charge. That's the headline here, of manslaughter with a firearm. So she's going straight to the county jail tonight. How do you reconcile that? I mean, what do you think's going through her mind tonight as she goes in there? It's got to be the most, it's 11:21 out here. By the time she's booked in, it's going to be 1, 2 in the morning in Florida, dark, in a jail that she's never been in before. I mean, what could possibly be going on in her mind right now? None of it can be pleasant.
Yeah, and I've talked with people about this very thing, and sometimes it's not as bad as they expected at first. I mean, obviously prison's not exactly fun. Jail isn't fun, but they catastrophized how awful it was going to be so much that I think that the fact that it's a lesser charge might make her feel a little bit more hopeful, despite the fact that it's obviously terrifying what she's going through. So she may be able, depending on the type of personality she has, to focus somewhat on the silver lining that it will not be the rest of her life, presumably, or anywhere close to it, that she will be in prison. So when something like this happens, people go between denial and sometimes the sorry, it's late, so my brain's not firing on all cylinders. So the brain really likes homeostasis, though. It likes to get back to baseline. So despite the fact that the first couple of days are going to feel awful, eventually people get used to it. They never don't grow to enjoy it, but that's just what is, and so they learn to sort of accept it after a few days.
By the way, neither here nor there, but a big congrats to the USA gymnastics team. That's what I was watching when this all broke. And nice to see a little bit of good news, and Simone Biles bringing back the gold for America. So go USA. But Gigi McKelvey, they have a then I think it was 2 years old. Now she's a 6-year-old child. What happens to that child now? Mom is going to prison. Dad is no longer with us. Sadly, you've seen this in many cases, and we're seeing it yet again right here. I did not see this comment. Just scroll down to it. Both his kids have no parents now. Number one, how do we reconcile that? Number two, what happens to this young child?
I had heard that if she were found guilty, I can't confirm it, but I saw somewhere in an article that maybe Doug's family may try to get some custody of this child. It's kind of tough because this kid has lived with this grandmother her whole life. I'm not sure that, but maybe could be some kind of time sharing. I think it would be very important for her and Eva to establish a relationship. I mean, Eva's an adult, but they share a dad. And I think that is just such a tragic thing about all this. The kids are always the one that get caught with the raw end of the deal when these things happen. And so hopefully, her and Eva can bond but man, it's just, and what I was thinking when you were talking about how terrified she must be going to jail tonight is, do you think that maybe when they came back and said they were at an impasse, it gave her some hope that maybe she would go home tonight?
Mhm.
They would decide if they're going to retry her. If they do, it's going to be a year or more down the road. You have to wonder, was that just such a huge bulldoze to her of that guilty verdict? Because when they said we have a verdict, I said, it's not going to be a hung jury. It's one or the other. And we're looking at 6 hours. So I really kind of leaned towards guilty when they said verdict after that amount of time and not going home and sleeping on it. I thought you probably had one holdout. They went back there, hashed out what they needed to, and then said, yeah, we've got her. So I just think that had to have been a huge blow because I was thinking, they're going to be hung jury. You got somebody with their heels dug in the sand. They're not going to budge. So I was really shocked.
Yeah. My man, Vinny Politan, who wrote a blurb for my book, his guests are saying 11 and a half years for this is their prediction. We'll see what happens once we get to sentencing in 6 weeks. Per Google, 10 to 30 years in Florida. Josh Ritter, I got to ask you, I asked JP this, I think before you got on. I mean, the case was just, it seemed, I don't want to use the word rushed because the judge wasn't rushing anyone. It just, I've never seen a murder trial zip along at this pace. And then, as we know, they indicated that they were hung just tonight, and they only began deliberating at 5 p.m. Legally, is this already grounds for an appeal that these jurors, came back with this decision so quickly, or is that just the justice system? No grounds for appeals on that. Move it along to the next trial. What's the deal?
You're right. It's no grounds for appeal. I mean, there's very little grounds that you can get out of the way a jury conducts themselves short of a showing of some sort of misconduct. So short of, there being some sort of evidence that they were considering something they shouldn't have been considering, that somehow there was an outside influence on what they were doing. But yeah, and it happens. Sometimes you get these lightning quick verdicts, and it can be astonishing to the lawyers involved because you've put so much time and energy and effort and sweat and tears into presenting a case. And then you begin to wonder, were they listening to anything, or had they made up their minds while this trial was taking place? And, I think jurors, like anybody else, like all of us, as they're watching, they are kind of making up their minds. And if they all go back there and they're all of the same mindset, and there's maybe one person who was holding out, if it wasn't for that one holdout, we might have even seen a quicker verdict in this case. I doubt it was that, if I'm correct in this, that they did split the baby to some extent and make a compromise. I doubt it was 5 jurors coming down from a second degree to a manslaughter just to get a verdict done. I imagine it was that one individual, if it was one holdout, who moved their decision towards what the majority was, and therefore, if it wasn't for that one holdout, we might have even seen a quicker verdict. And to your point, though, to your question, no, it doesn't create an appealable issue. It's just kind of one of those anomalies of doing trial work, that it just sometimes juries are unpredictable, and part of them being unpredictable is how quickly they take to deliberate.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And there's a question here I'm going to toss to Gigi, and then I've got another question for Dr. G. But COE, can you just re-rack that video, as we say in TV news, without audio and just play it? I think it's interesting for people to see her reaction. But Gigi, this was a 6-person panel. I know obviously we covered Charlie. That was 12. I'm not sure if it's just this jurisdiction that does 6. I'm not sure, but Rosemary Romero comes to us outside of Toronto, Canada. Would the verdict have been the same, do you think, with 12 jurors? I asked Dr. G this prior. It's a lot easier to come to a decision with a half the amount of people, usually, because you got half the amount of convincing to do. But what do you think if it was a full jury panel of 12?
I think the visit to the courtroom saying they were deadlocked with 6 is a good indication that if you had twice that many, you may have had more than one holdout. I mean, that's just, look, I cannot math, but I can math that. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I really thought they were just going to come back and say, we're deadlocked. We've got one that just won't move. I'm still kind of shocked. I mean, I was not going to be shocked with any of the verdicts, to be honest, Joel. I think that guilty, not guilty hung jury, it wasn't going to blow me away, but I'm just surprised that they came back with it, with manslaughter. It's just, so maybe that was a compromise. Maybe like they all couldn't agree on second degree murder, but, and I think maybe that goes back to the incidents here in South Carolina where, they were kind of extreme. I mean, fire a gun in the ceiling, punch a hole in the wall, but he never hit her. So I can see and kind of understand maybe why one person would say, yeah, but if he did that 3 years ago, who's to say he didn't lose it that night? I think with a jury of 12, yeah, I think there's a better chance it would have just been a flat out hung jury.
Since
My listeners were divided. I mean, it has been
Yeah.
a 50-50 chat. It has been half yes, half no. I mean, there's no majority in my chat this whole trial.
This has been very Karen Reed-esque for us as well. Divisive, split, people angry about the other side taking a side. I'm going to go to Josh since the question is for him. How do you think the prosecutors handled it? There was talk, and it was interesting. I mean, they were basically taking shots at someone who claimed to be a DV victim, Josh, but that's because they don't. We were having an audio issue before in the earlier show, but Josh, the state doesn't believe in this theory that she was even a victim. But do you think that there needed to be more sensitivity to domestic violence victims in general? The way the state handled it was a little harsh, I would say, to put it politely.
Yeah, to put it politely, it was a little bit harsh. Now, I don't know if that affected the verdict. I don't think if they handled it any differently, they would have secured a second degree murder out of this. So they're probably going back and patting themselves on the back and saying they job well done. But let me preface what I'm about to say with this. As a prosecutor, these are extremely difficult cases because of that kind of nuanced, soft touch you have to take with it. Because you're right. You can't be completely dismissive of her allegations of abuse, because if you do, then it looks like you're just being dismissive of domestic violence altogether. It looks like
let me just interrupt for 1 second. It goes beyond that. What if one of the jurors second cousins or first cousins,
100%.
right? You've got to be sensitive to them, correct?
Absolutely, 100%, because it does affect nearly everyone has either experienced it directly or has a friend who's experienced it. So if you're just dismissive of it as a whole, you're going to sound like you're insensitive to that, and you're going to turn jurors off. Also, I've seen prosecutors go after people if they feel like they're lying, but if it's not an obvious lie to everyone, you getting so indignant about it might turn off jurors too, because there might be some jurors who are not taking her testimony the same way that you did. All of that being said, I do feel this went too far. There was a like a swagger of indignation about it. It's one thing to not believe the defendant when they're testifying and believe that they're lying, but it's another thing to look like you're badgering and to look like you're just being kind of cruel, and I think there's a way to call someone a liar without making it look ugly, which is the way it came across at points. And I think a lot of people agree on that. It's being a prosecutor is difficult at these exact moments when you're trying to project strength and you're trying to stand up for the rights of a victim who's dead at this person's hands. But at the same time, you do have to, temper that with some acknowledgement that domestic violence may be real. And by the way, those aren't mutually exclusive things. You can also have a defendant who was the victim of domestic violence and still committed a murder, and be able to handle that and project that sentiment to the jury, which I feel that she did fall short of doing in this case.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I mean, I would almost say that the state was taunting her, especially when they were asking her to give testimony about, the moment this happened. And the prosecutor was like, well, show me then, show me. And she was just being very aggressive, maybe passive aggressive. I don't know, but I think it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way.
Which could have been a very powerful moment for the prosecution. It could have exposed a lot of her inconsistencies and exaggerations and everything else. But instead, the way it came across as theatrics and badgering and almost trying to humiliate the defendant, when that's not really your job. Your job is to make sure justice is done, not to then further embarrass the defendant for just testifying.
Yeah. Dr. G, a couple of comments here popped out to me for you. Miriam says, watch how she walked out. She didn't even look at her family. What would that tell you? Just not even giving a nod to her own loved ones? Is that just utter defeat? What is that?
It could be that she was just so shocked or trying to figure out what's going on next that somehow it's surprising. I think a lot of people would, but yeah, I don't know why she didn't, because I think that she probably does care about her family. I don't think that even if she was guilty of doing this, that she would probably be that callous. So yeah, she was probably just caught up in her own head.
Yeah, and then this is the next comment that I like Gigi and Dr. G. I'll go to Dr. G first, which is this: Doug is the victim. This is like the dividing line. Half the people think he is, and the other half think he's a monster. I'm with Josh, where it's not necessarily, I don't think, mutually exclusive. Like, he could have been a monster. She could be a victim, but she still could have committed manslaughter, which is what she was just convicted of. Just a much bigger question here from a psychologist standpoint. There's a lot of people just in STS Nation who sadly are survivors of DV. What does this do to people who are invested in this case, who may be victims themselves, who see a woman that they believe was victimized not be acquitted, and they find her guilty, and she is the victim in their eyes? What does this do to other victims?
This can be tremendously upsetting for people that see something like this, that see something they feel is unjust, to see that if they believe, had she not done that, for all we know, that she would have been killed herself or something like that. We don't know what would have happened, but at the time, if she's to be believed, she believed that was the case, that either I defend myself or he's potentially, mortally wound me. So I think that it can be it makes people question their sense of safety. And that's really what happens when people are victims of domestic violence, is their sense of safety changes. And so seeing something like this can be, and I hate this word, but I can't think of a better one right now, but it can be very triggering, and it can be long lasting for a while. It can put you in a bad mood. Maybe you're not even thinking about the case, but the next few days you just are a little bit agitated. So yeah, it definitely has an emotional impact.
By the way, triggering is an overused cliche. I'm with you on that. It's kind of like when people call me a grifter on Twitter during the Karen Reed case. It's like,
I
if you're
couldn't even
gonna,
say happy birthday to you, Joel.
you, G Money, you wish me a happy birthday at some point, but
I
thank you.
did, and then people were being mean to you.
Yeah, they sure were, but it's okay.
I got you back, man. You're a
Yeah,
good dude.
thank you.
Can we
G
just
Money.
talk about the fact that statistically, 1 in 3 women are victims or
Yeah.
have been a victim of domestic violence?
Mhm.
And my best friend who started this podcast with me, she's moved on and started a domestic violence safe haven with another girl who has become just our best friend. We're all just this little group. And the stories that they don't get to tell me details, but what I have heard is heartbreaking, Joel. 1 in 3 women. I think the biggest thing is anybody out there has to know there is help available. There are so many organizations that can get you out of the situation. And just, for me, I just want to reiterate, it will not get better. When you're living with an abuser, and I'm not talking about Ashley or Doug here, I'm talking in general. This is my PSA, the more you know moment.
Yeah.
Get
By the way,
help and
I'm sorry, COE, if you have a number out there that you can put up to
I
help
have a
people,
number right
Oh.
here for it's a 1-800 number. This is for the hiding place, and
Yeah.
they can find you help all over the country. We did an episode not too long ago
Give
where
us
we
the
just
number,
did,
G Money.
I'm trying to find it. Where we did just some education on it, and you would not believe the calls that they got nationwide and locally from women who are in very dangerous situations, and they have connected them with local resources that get them out. So let me get this number. I'm
All right.
such a bad friend for not having it memorized. Thank
Nope.
goodness I don't have to call it. It's 1-888-341-9568. They will talk to men or women who are in domestic violence relationships. If you are not local to us here in South Carolina, they will go out of their way to connect you to resources in your area.
Look how
And
quick
so
the COE is. It's already on the screen. I can
look
never
at
do that.
COE. See,
Yeah.
I'm like sitting here thinking it's bedtime and COE is like popping
Yeah,
it. So
it's-
good. That number right there, you don't have to be local. These two women, I'm going to tell you, Joel, they're saving lives every day. And this has become a very near and dear cause to me because 1 in 3. And the conversation we need to have a lot more often too is men, just as much as women can be victims. And it's just not getting better. So
Yeah,
get
and
out alive.
Yeah, and you know what? I think men are much more reluctant. Dr. G, is that true? I mean, are men much more reluctant to come forward, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So significantly so. And I mean, statistically, women are far more likely to be victims of domestic violence, but men are very unlikely to come forward about it. That is true.
Sorry.
Out
Out of your DV, out of your DV patients, like what percentage would you say are male? Is it a very small percentage?
Yeah. Well, yeah, the ones who acknowledge it to me. Yeah. Because even in therapy, they might not tell me if that was true. So that would be, they're fairly rare. It would, 1 out of every, 20 couples I would see the male. If we're talking about physical violence, emotional, that's a lot more even. But that's a different thing.
And that's just as damaging, if not more than physical, because once somebody gets in your head and changes who you think about yourself, it's a cycle.
I'll put it to you this way, Joel. I handled, it had to be hundreds of DV cases when I was a prosecutor, and I cannot think of one as I sit here right now where the male was the victim.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that doesn't surprise me, but they are out there, and it's an absolute tragedy that it's going on, and it continues to go on. We had an interesting conversation. Dr. G was on the show yesterday. I believe 5 of the 6 jurors are women, Dr. G, and we were talking, will women be easier or tougher? And the indications right now is that women were pretty tough on her, especially with this is all conjecture, but the conjecture out there collectively is that more people were likely, no one knows this because no one's talked to the jurors, more people were likely in favor of guilt on the more serious charge, assuming that is true, Dr. G. What does this tell you about women not buying her story?
Yeah, a lot of the feedback I've gotten, well, there's been a wide variety of people who've given me feedback on this, but a lot of people say, you're just a guy. That's why you're not seeing this. As a woman, I see it differently. There's a lot of women that, for whatever reason, are seeing this very differently than I'm seeing it. And so, yeah, I actually don't know why it is that women are being feel so certain that she's not being real or not telling the truth. And I think one of the things that stands out to me that they didn't really do, I mean, obviously they mentioned, Doug knocking out the dog and shooting a hole in the ceiling and all that. But when you think about it, how many people do you know that have done things like that? It's really, really extreme behavior. And so I wish they had talked a little bit more about the psychology of what the hell that means and what that might imply for somebody to do that, because those are really serious things. I don't know anybody personally who's ever shot a ceiling and screamed at somebody and done these kinds of things, right? Like, that's really troubling, concerning behavior that might, imply quite a few things. So
Yeah.
I wish they'd spent more time on that, actually.
Can I jump in on this topic of how
please.
men and women react to this as jurors? And this is not scientific, but anecdotal. My experience was that oftentimes when you're dealing with these types of cases, that jurors seem to view their verdict as a verdict on the problem as a whole, sometimes more than the actual case itself. So men, and again, I know I'm generalizing and being anecdotal here, but men want to show that they don't condone domestic violence in any kind of way, and they're more concerned that their verdict might show that they're condoning domestic violence and maybe more sympathetic to it. That is my experience in doing voir dire in these types of cases, and the response oftentimes that you would get from men is that they just kind of wanted to let everybody in the room know that they don't in any way condone this behavior.
I mean, interesting. That doesn't surprise me, I don't think. John Duncan, he's a grief counselor, and he says the lack of empathy directed towards the defendant in this case truly blows my mind. He's obviously in that world. I'm assuming he's a he. Some people sometimes use pseudonyms here, but Gigi, to you, I mean, you've been a trial watcher. You've seen a lot of these. What about this notion that women jurors can be even tougher on female defendants than a male juror? And in this case, it seems like maybe that's the case.
I think women have this intuition when they watch other women, especially when they're defendants. And, so I think that people who watch these trials and seem to be very vocal that she's lying or whatever is they're just going with what they've dealt with other women in the past. I really do. I think we judge people, Joel. I mean, really, whether we're right or wrong, I think it's just what we do. And especially in true crime, you see it. It's mainly a lot of women. I mean, we do have a lot of men who watch, but it seems to be more predominantly women who consume true crime. And so I think that it's just I think in this case, what I saw in my chat was people saying what the prosecutor said, no tears. There were no tears when she was on that stand. There was a lot of her face looking like she was crying, but there were no tears. So, and then you had people say, well, nobody presents the way you think they should when they're going through a trauma. So, like I say, it's been split down the middle in my chat. I've treaded very carefully. But it's been interesting to read the comments because you have two totally different sides. She's a liar or she's a victim, and there is no middle ground with anybody. And
Yeah.
so I really did not want to cover this live because I don't like these hot button cases. But I'm glad I did because we did have some good chats during the lives about domestic violence and things like that. And I think the bottom line is just the jury made their decision, and whether we agree or not, that's our judicial system. And
Mm.
so I'm curious to see as far as appeals go. I know that he's mentioned it several times during the trial
Yeah.
when they were doing these little hearings outside the presence of the jury. So, but
He mentioned
yeah.
it right after the reading of the verdict,
He
too.
did. He
Yeah.
did. He actually the judge kinda said, "I don't think you've got an appealable issue there," but it's just a hot button topic because people are not gonna budge on where they feel, and that all kinda goes back to just, what you see and how you feel she comes across. I look at it like a juror, and I think a lot of people in true crime do too.
Mm. Older Wiser says, as a DV survivor, I'm telling you guys, she is an abuser. She triggers me. She's so abusive. He didn't knock out the dog. The dog jumped between them and got hurt when he did that. Again, Dr. G, an incredibly complicated, sensitive conversation. And there's going to be a lot of people who take this personally for one reason or another, either because they are victims or believe that she is not a victim, or both, or all of the above. I know you said it earlier, but just your psychological advice to the collective group out here, if they're feeling triggered as Older Wiser is tonight, what would you say to people who are feeling that way?
Yeah, I would say first thing is don't feel afraid to unplug from from all of this and just take some time away from some of this true crime stuff. It can get really intense, and sometimes you got to remind yourself, you know what, I don't have to continue to consume this. Like, I can take a break from it. Not STS, but some of the other stuff. And so I think talking about, like, if you have people you trust, you can talk about these things with somebody that will listen to you, that that's not going to challenge you or agitate you, that just wants to hear you talk about these things. That's probably the best thing we can do, is to we call it processing it, which is sort of a nebulous term, but just to sort of bring it out of the unconscious, talk about it, talk about how you're feeling about it. And if you've got somebody you can talk to, that's ideal.
Yeah, even if it's a friend. And by the way,
Yeah.
this is a number that Gigi gave us on the screen. But if anyone's having trouble, you can just Google, domestic hotline or help, domestic TV help in your area, and I'm sure it'll pop up. Dr. G, before I go back to Josh Ritter, just very quickly, they always say the most difficult part about a domestic violence relationship, one that's filled with that, is when you're trying to leave. Is that true? And if you're in a situation and you're trying to leave, what do you do?
Yeah, leaving is the hardest part of all of this, because you're basically saying, I'm going to turn my whole life upside down and I don't know what's going to happen next oftentimes. And so not everybody's got a great support system. So trusting that there are people out there that can help, that, if you do reach out for help, there will be people that are willing to do whatever it takes to try to make sure you're safe. And things, and as cheesy as this may sound, I mean, things really can get better if you get help and get out of there, and just know that the inconveniences of having to turn your life upside down, may lead to you being safe and all of those things. So, it's incredibly difficult.
Yeah, it's the hardest part. I think it's also the part that takes the most bravery, to just pick up and be able to say that you're taking off. And if you're in a situation like that, maybe you can call a friend, call the police, call whoever you need to do to extricate yourself from that situation. It's just a phone call away. People feel all alone. Listen, for a variety of reasons, even the people who seem like they have the most friends and the biggest personalities on the inside can feel the most alone. We all remember Robin Williams, one of the most beloved actors of our time. And so if you're in this situation, I cannot emphasize it enough. There is help out there. As much as I whine and complain, I am an optimist myself, and I know you can get out of it. I know you have the strength to get out of it. You just have to ask for help, as hard as that might be. Heather Tompkins, gifting 5 Surviving the Survivor memberships. Josh Ritter, you said something. Yep, we read this one, COE, and thank you, John Duncan, for that. Tardy as usual from Heather Tompkins. Great to see her. But Josh, earlier on, you mentioned the defense basically went with the all or nothing defense. It's either you believe it was murder or you don't. In no way do I want to insinuate that it was any kind of legal malpractice, but was this a big misstep by the defense to not brace the jurors for another possibility and have them circumvent their way around the lesser charge, which they did not do? He didn't really speak to that, as you pointed out.
I don't think it's malpractice, but it is an interesting choice, and it's strategic because they went into this with there was no hedging their bets from the very beginning in the way that this case was presented. From opening statements, he said, "I'm going to tell you some very ugly things I'm going to have to say about the victim in this case," and went about doing that, and that's exactly how they put on their case. And so, at closing arguments, it can seem that you're being disingenuous, or that you're not entirely faithful in even your client's own case, to say, "Oh, and by the way, if you don't believe that she committed this act in self-defense and that she should walk out an innocent person. Let's go ahead and talk about the elements of second degree and why these are not satisfied. And let's talk about intent and why this wasn't satisfied. And you can consider lesser intents. It just diminishes from your argument. It's difficult to do. It's a high wire act that very few people can really pull off, and very few cases give you an opportunity to do that. But I think there were ways, and maybe ways he could have taken more advantage of by talking about in how the prosecution, and I'm not saying this is true, but I'm saying he could have made the argument in his closing about how the prosecution didn't prove certain things beyond a reasonable doubt. But to me, it stood out because he really drew a line in the sand by giving them, in his view, a binary choice. This is second degree. His words were, this is second degree or it's nothing. And so that was the choice that he left the jurors with, which was, high risk, high reward sort of a strategy.
Which tonight, if I'm her and I'm in the jail, I'm in the Manatee County Jail, I'm not happy with that decision. He's not sitting in the jail. I am. So Marcia Caviano, I'm going to toss this tough one to Gigi. She likes taking the tough questions. I wanted to believe her, Gigi, but I felt her testimony was disingenuous. What if she did kill him not in self-defense? What was the most evidence that did that for you, I guess? But what about this? What if, she was just being disingenuous? And I'll couple that. There's a tweet right now from someone called Joy and Outrage that says, jurors, stop using manslaughter charges as a compromise. Two things in one here, Gigi. I'll let you reflect on either one or answer either one. But what do you think about this?
I think for me, I mean, if I'm going to play devil's advocate here and say, if you look at I think what could have been hard for the jurors, especially, is the text messages in the week leading up to the shooting seemed very normal. They were doing normal things. He was going to Lowe's. She was asking if he could get boxes. They were sharing pictures. He showed the U-Haul. So I for me, it's just like, what happened? And I don't know. I don't profess to know. I really have no clue, Joel. I might have been that one person on that jury that said, I mean, I think it could have been this way or that way. I just can't say for sure. But for me, I think, just on both sides, I said the past behavior by Doug could have been an issue. And then on Ashley's part, the fact that, they brought this up. They lived apart for 3 years. She's telling him one thing, and then she's telling the doctor the other thing. I want to be with you. I don't want to be with him. And then those text messages and then the video that they showed. And I don't know if it was confirmed, but that could have been the day he was shot and killed, if not very close to it. So if you're on that jury, you think she's laughing. She looks relaxed. She's throwing her head back and laughing. Her mom looks very comfortable. So I'm just saying, for me, I could not sit here and tell you how I would have voted if I were on that jury, because this is one of those cases, Joel, I never had a firm yes or no, even at the end of closings, because there were so many things on both sides that I could see as valid. Yeah. So I just trust the jurors, followed their heart and did what they felt they needed to do. I mean, at the end of the day, Eva and their daughter, Ashley and Doug's daughter, are, like you say, without parents. And that's the end result of it. Was it truly self-defense? Was it not? I think the answer may just, have died in that room with Doug. I just don't think we're ever really going to know.
Yeah. Gigi, I'm with you. I was watching as much as I could of this, and I'm just not an expert like Dr. G I couldn't really, to be honest, I'm a good observer of people. I guess if I'm being 1,000% honest, not everything came across as completely genuine to me when she was giving her testimony. But the other side of me was saying, well, if she's a victim, I don't know how I would feel. And I don't know if I'd be in the same, I don't know how I would be projecting my own emotions on a either a jury of my peers or a courtroom, because I would have been this victim. So it's really hard to say how you're going to react, I think, unless you're in this particular situation and you are a victim. Only you know how you can react to that situation. Josh Ritter, to you from another tweet here. This is a person from overseas responding. And I'd just like to get your take on this. And we've discussed this. Prosecutors in America care more about winning than they do about justice. And this means that there is no justice. I still do think we have the best system, but this is something I grapple with all the time. I mean, I see it in talking to defense attorneys and talking to prosecutors. At the end of the day, it's about winning and losing, and whatever you need to do to figure out or formulate a strategy to win your case. Is that a fundamental problem, or is that just as good as it gets in this country?
Well, it shouldn't be the way it is for prosecutors. For defense attorneys, it's a different story. They are supposed to be zealous advocates of their client, and that includes anything and everything that's within the bounds of ethics and the law. And so, they can have at it. For prosecutors, they do have to wear a different hat. They are trying to be advocates on behalf of their client, the people of the state of that they represent. And they're trying to win. Sure, it's an adversarial occupation and you're trying to win, but you do have to be making sure that you're doing it the right way. And so when you see these types of cases, and this may be one of them, the next one that comes to mind is Alec Baldwin. When you see these cases where the prosecutor seems to become embroiled in the case and taking it personally, and it does seem to be very much about winning rather than doing it the right way, something has broken down. I don't think it's a breakdown in the system. I think it's a breakdown with that prosecutor and the way that they're handling it, because it is a different job. It's not just win at all costs on behalf of your client. It's win, but do it the right way, because they also, for purely, for the pure reason of making sure that these verdicts stick too. I mean, you want to make sure that your verdict is held up on appeal, and that's something that prosecutors should be considering, on top of making sure that they are in the service of justice rather than just in the service of winning that particular case.
Gigi, I'm going to go to you on this, but we might have to swing back to Josh, and then we'll start to wind things down. I appreciate everyone coming on at this late hour. Basically begged, and because they're kind best guests, they said we will hop on. So I appreciate all three of them. Civil lawsuits, Gigi, is that something that's going to follow next from either of the families against the other family now that this has been litigated in a criminal court? What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, is there money to be had? I mean, is it worth all the litigation and rehashing this and putting Eva and the other child through it? I mean, just today, Micah Miller's parents came to an agreement with John Paul that they were not going to go the civil route. Instead, they're going to go for some kind of a coercive control law or something to that effect. I mean, civil cases. This is a woman that lives with her mom and has a daughter and has had a lot of litigation. So I don't think there's money there. I mean, maybe they will, but you can't get blood out of a turnip. So maybe it's just best to accept the verdict. And, if they're happy with the fact that she was found guilty on something, walk away, find some normalcy if you can, especially Eva, who not only found her mother dead in the bed, but lost her dad. So that's what I wish, is anybody on both sides of the family is affected by this finds some sort of normalcy, but fighting it out for money that probably isn't there. What's the point?
Yeah. And it sounds like Doug Benefield had nothing toward the end. So, and she wasn't, I don't think, much better off financially. We don't know the inner workings of their accounting or the books that they keep, but that's what they were intimating in court. The best lawyer is the one you don't need, from Ralph Cramden of Honeymooners fame. He's joined the chat tonight as well. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to start to wind it down. I'm going to go to the very bottom. If you have a final question or two, put it in the big triple Qs, and I'll scroll all the way down and I'll get it in as we say goodnight. Dr. G, of course, he's a personal friend of mine. He's got a PsyD, which means he's a doctor of psychology. He's a human body language and behavior expert. He hosts an amazing channel called Dr. G Explains. And he and I are trying to figure out a way to do some stuff together, and G Money as well. And I'm hoping that does happen, and Josh Ritter as well. So I'm hoping that all does work out. But Dr. G, again, I'm looking at X, I'm looking at our comments, I'm looking at notes I'm taking, and the one consistent theme here tonight and the one common denominator is a lot of frustration. And again, to use this word that neither of us like, a lot of triggering. I just saw basically a tweet that says, for anybody who's happy about this guilty verdict, karma is coming your way because I'm a survivor. And no one should be happy with a guilty verdict. What say you with the two sides in this case really kind of going at it?
Yeah, well, part of the challenge with the fact that the true crime community is very intelligent is that the smarter you are, the more you're going to dig your heels in when you've come to a conclusion, because you know you're smart enough to make good decisions and come to good conclusions. So we all think that we're right here, and this happens in the true crime community a lot, is that when there's something divisive, which isn't every case, but some of them, we end up feeling very strongly about it and then feel agitated when we see people feeling so opposite of how we feel. So in this situation, when people are talking about like the various facts of the case, some people see it as evidence that Doug was this awful abusive guy, and others will see it that she was. And so yeah, it's I feel agitated by this because I work so much with abuse victims. Like, this has been really irritating for me, honestly. This has been a very difficult case to cover.
Yeah. Dr. G, why, just to cut you off, which I'm doing right now, this comment to you, why are you only, this is me he's talking about, not you, but why are you only referring to Ashley Benefield as the victim when Doug was the victim who is dead? That's a good point. I mean, I think to be fair, I think we've said that he likely could be a victim. It's not mutual. It's not like you have to be the victim or not be the victim. Maybe they were both victims, right, Dr. G?
It's possible. And I mean, I've been pretty clear that the way I feel about this is that I believe that what she said, I personally believe her in this situation. So it's hard for me when I see her as a victim and somebody who I think was scrambling to try to believe she was trying to save her own life. So it's true. I'm not labeling Doug as a victim, even though I guess technically that's true, but that's obviously not how I'm seeing it in my own head. So I think it's an interesting observation that people are making about my own behavior.
We'll sign off in the order we came in. So Dr. G is first since he was on first. Josh Ritter next up. He is a former LA prosecutor of the year back in 2015. He now has his own law firm, Eldabe Ritter. The guy's too handsome, too smart, too well-spoken not to have his own podcast. So he does, and you better subscribe, Courtroom Confidential. And the thing is blowing up. Josh Ritter, from a legal standpoint, just the speed with which this trial went, the sort of the speed at which deliberations went, then the jury was hung and they went back and came back with a verdict in a very timely manner. What do you make of all this? And is this going to have any impact on other DV cases, in your opinion, from a legal standpoint?
I think we get a little spoiled sometimes with the Karen Reed type cases that drag on for weeks and weeks, and we become, so involved in the day-to-day drama of that we don't realize there are thousands of cases taking place across this country every single day that do wrap up very quickly. You will see murder cases that wrap up within a matter of 2 weeks, and even more complicated cases than this. That whole being said, this did even seem to kind of make my neck whip around with how quickly it all happened. But I didn't see anything about it that I felt was inappropriate. I didn't feel that the judge was cutting off any evidence prematurely, and I don't feel that he was not allowing either side to explore their case. It's just they had, plenty of court time and got through their witnesses with alacrity and got through their closing arguments. The one thing I will say that was not troubling, but made my eyebrow raise was when I got a text from you saying, "Can you hop on? There's a verdict," because I thought they came back saying they're hung. Of course, they're going to go through and come back tomorrow and have everybody sleep on it and kind of, get some coffee and, go after it again with a fresh mind. So the fact that they said they're hung, went back, and within, an hour or so, came back and said they had a verdict, that was quick to me. But as far as that causing any problems on appeal, I don't think so at all.
Yeah, and I don't think he said much. I don't even think he kind of threatened the Allen charge at that
No.
point. He just said, "Give it a few more," and it was a few more, and they came back. Again, this was a panel of 6 jurors, and I believe 5 are women. The headline: Do we have a verdict? Yes, we do. Guilty on the lesser charge of manslaughter with a firearm. I guess it's 11 and a half years on up to 30 is where we stand in terms of what sentencing could be. Gigi McKelvey, for those who are living under a rock, she is the rock star podcaster. Pretty Lies and Alibis is her show. She's covered Lori Vallow extensively, Alec Murdaugh extensively. That's where we met her, but she covers all the big cases. A fantastic human, a fantastic podcaster. She and I are going to be covering the Donna Adelson case, which is what I did a show on earlier. I'll tell you, if you ever want to have a trippy experience, get COVID for the 90th time like me, and then do 2 shows in a room that the AC is about 30 degrees too warm, and you'll have a very interesting experience. That's what I'm going through right now. Are we covering the Sarah Boone trial? Yes, and I hope Gigi does that too. That's right after Donna Adelson's trial in September. It's in October in Orlando. And Steve Cohen and I think, are going to go to that. I'm very interested. I'll be honest, I have not covered it at all. Don't know that much about it. But
Oh boy, Joel. Hop on the Hot Mess Express. Shoot, shoot.
I've seen the video and I've seen the change of attorneys. So I think I'm all in on that. And one of the things that we're trying to do in 2024 into 2025 is going to more trials, because I know from my reporting days, and Gigi knows this, you're never going to get the information you're going to get unless you're on the ground and the guest for your show. So we're going to be a lot more hands-on in terms of being at these trials. So you will see us there. Gigi McKelvey, I know you said 2 of your best friends run DV, I guess, support groups and or clinics. This is sort of most trials are all lose-lose. There's never a winner in a trial, but this one seems to hit a little bit harder. And I'll be honest, I'm thinking of Ashley Benefield tonight. I'm thinking of Doug Benefield, who's no longer with us. I have a feeling he was not the greatest person in the world. That is an understatement. But I'm more importantly thinking of all the people out there right now who are in these very tenuous situations, who feel stuck, and not in a DV sense, but I've been there myself. Life is tough for a lot of people. It can get tough. You just have to keep working to get yourself out of it. My dad, a psychiatrist for 40 something years, he just invoked the Nike slogan, "Just do it." He'd just say, it's always action that speaks louder than words. I know I'm carrying on. But Gigi, just your life advice, your thoughts reflecting on what we just saw tonight.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning the hiding place. They actually house victims on site there, and their long-term goal is to put tiny houses. They have a ton of acres. It's in the middle of nowhere in the mountains. If they can't house them on site, they put them in hotels. So if I've seen them at the ER for 8 hours sitting with somebody who has been beaten to a pulp, or sexually assaulted, that kind of thing. They do amazing work and have huge plans, but it is just do it. Most people stay because they have kids. They can't afford to leave. It's a lot of times it is a monetary reason, but there are resources out there, and your life is at stake. And so it's just become such a passion of mine, with them educating me on this, and just realizing how many men, women, and children are victims every single minute. So just get out. Like your dad said, just do it, because the end result is what we see when we do true crime, which is the times where somebody didn't get out and then they're dead. And then families are broken, kids are without parents. And it just breaks my heart. Nobody deserves to be treated like that, emotionally or physically, in a relationship. Your life matters. You are worth it. Get out. And I don't think that there has been a survivor that they do group, or they even do Zoom therapy with people, who says, man, I regret getting out. Like, this is a new beginning. They forgot who they were under this spell. And when they break out and they're like, wow, I never knew, I forgot who I was. It's so refreshing, but you got to make that move first. And so my heart goes out to anybody who are victims, because it is a cycle and it is hard to break. So, but there is hope and help. So get out.
Yeah, I mean, these cycles are really tough to get out of, but it's doable, and there's plenty of examples of success, and you just have to look at some of these success stories and know that you can do it yourself. I'm going to end on a somewhat positive note, and that is Ellen Greenberg. Some say she was a victim of DV. It's debatable, but she wound up dead in 2011. She had 20 stab wounds, 10 to the front, 10 to the back of her head and neck. And 2 of them were post-mortem, an independent autopsy found, which means that they were inflicted when she was dead. It was ruled as suicide. And that case has never been investigated. Her parents, who are friends of mine, Josh and Sandy Greenberg, they have been working on this since 2011. And today there was word that finally the Supreme Court in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is going to hear their case now. So look, it's given me the chills, but it's been since
Me too, Joel.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's been since 2011. I can tell you the family has invested over $500,000 of their own money, and answers could finally be coming. But think about this: stabbed 20 times, 10 to the front, 10 to the back, very back of your head and the very back of your neck, and they ruled it a suicide. And the other evidence will just blow you away in this case, which leads one to believe that her killer is out there, and he, if it's who we think it is living his life in New York City, and it's gone on too long, and hopefully justice will be served. But again, the case has never, ever been investigated. We're going to have someone who's working on a documentary about this case on Monday night, along with the investigative reporter of record on this case. So please join us for that special show. I think it'll be Monday at 5 p.m., but you got to follow me on Instagram, Surviving the Survivor, or Twitter at Podcast STS to get the show times. I cannot thank this crew enough. Gigi McKelvey, Pretty Lies and Alibis, Dr. G of Dr. G Explains on YouTube, Josh Ritter, Courtroom Confidential. It's an awesome podcast. Check it out. Thank you all. Love you, America. See you tomorrow, and wishing everybody a great, great evening.